Hi, I'm Daria. During the day, I'm a technical animator working at a AAA games company, and in my free time, I'm making an indie game, The Land Forgotten. The Land Forgotten is a 2D adventure puzzle game set in a fantasy world. It tells the story of Quali, an apprentice of a wizard who goes on a quest with her friend, a rat. The most unique part about The Land Forgotten is its puzzles, as they are all based on languages and mathematical principles. You can think of games like Chants of Sennaar or Heaven's Vault, where the player is deciphering various languages. The similar game mechanic is also at the core of The Land Forgotten. However, all the languages you encounter in my game are real. Let me give an example. As the player goes through the world, they encounter large stones with marks on the edge. Those markings form a pattern corresponding to the names of different people we either meet or learn about. The first name is given, but the player needs to figure out the rest by finding common patterns. These stones and the writing might seem completely made up, but they're actually based on the Ogham stones in Ireland. The writing on the stones uses an early medieval alphabet, and the names you see in the game are actual Old Irish names. Ogham stones are only one example of the kind of puzzles you'll find. There are also Mongolian words disguised as keys, secret messages in Basque, plants in Kikuyu, and many other examples. All the puzzles in The Land Forgotten are inspired by the problems given at the Linguistic Olympiad, an international competition where students translate words or sentences from a foreign language based on some already existing translations. Some of the puzzles in The Land Forgotten are even taken from the Linguistic Olympiad itself, with the permission of the problem authors, of course. Others are developed with the help of linguists or native speakers. I've been working on The Land Forgotten since 2013. At least that's the date of the earliest build I have. I started making the game in Python, then switched to Flash and ActionScript, which was still a thing back then, and then to Unity. The first few years I worked on The Land Forgotten on my own, figuring out puzzles and general gameplay. I tested separate puzzles with friends and coworkers, trying to figure out which ones were the best fit. I wrote the rough story and dialogue for the first part of the game and found artists to work on the backgrounds, character art, and animation. Together, we were able to make a presentable vertical slice and even submitted the game for an independent games festival in 2016. But something wasn't quite right. The puzzles in the story didn't flow together the way I wanted, and although the art was good, it wasn't quite the way I envisioned it. On top of that, I was running out of savings to pay the team. Over the next few years, I focused on two things: making enough money to support development and creating a full playable version of the game from start to end. You see, early on, I made a mistake. I was focusing on the individual details of the first levels, but ignored the bigger picture and the design of the full game. So I put aside the implementation of new features and instead went back to the writing and planning stage. I made notes on the story and level structure, writing dialogue, and figuring out characters. Once I had the design on paper, I began to build this new version of the game. It took a while, but once it was ready, I was able to test it with friends and fellow game developers. Seeing those playtests of the full game made me realize that it worked more or less, but had a lot of problems with both gameplay and narrative. The story I crafted, with its twists and turns, felt too complicated and not as engaging as I wanted it to be. The puzzles were enjoyable, but felt a bit disjointed and often unclear. I needed to change most of the writing and rethink the game's overall structure. At that point, I had some savings again, and I hired an editor who specialized in helping fantasy writers fix their novels. Together, we revised the whole story, focusing on adding conflict and picking a core idea. The Land Forgotten is mostly told through gameplay and dialogue, but players also find books that reveal extra lore. At that point, all the books in The Land Forgotten were written by me, and I went way overboard with them. Together, I wrote over 60,000 words just for those side stories, which, to put it in perspective, is close to the length of the first Harry Potter book. And that was way too much for my game. Playtesters only skimmed through the books at best, and having such long texts disrupted the core gameplay. I knew I needed a professional to help with the in-game books, and I was thrilled when the fantasy author Stephen Orion agreed to join the project. Steven rewrote some of the side stories, making them short and concise. He was also instrumental in shaping the game's narrative, acting as a story consultant in addition to being a writer on the project. The puzzle design also needed reworking. I found that the best approach was to test a series of puzzles in isolation to understand how they worked and whether I needed to add or remove any. So I made separate prototypes with nothing but the puzzles of the same language. In the actual game, they are encountered in different levels, but in my prototypes, I could put them all together. This required building almost entirely separate games to showcase those puzzles individually. But it was worth the effort. I was able to see if the puzzles fit well together and get feedback on their structure from fellow game developers. Some of the puzzles I prototyped on paper, which made it much easier to iterate on their design. At this point, I mostly made my own placeholder art for the environments and characters. I knew I wanted the backgrounds to be hand-painted. I was inspired by the works of Alan Lee, Arthur Rackham, Brian Froud, and many other classical illustrators whose work fits so well with the fantasy genre. However, the design of a video game background is very different from that of a book illustration. You need to have specific interactive objects placed in a way that is clear to the player, while also keeping in mind the movement of the character through that environment. After a long search and many art tests, I found two amazing artists. Nicole Gallagher joined the project as an environment designer. She was responsible for creating the digital versions of the backgrounds, adding visual storytelling elements, and considering the functionality of different objects. Xiaoyin Luo, a traditional watercolor artist, was responsible for painting the backgrounds in the game. She printed out Nicole's designs and created true watercolor masterpieces out of each one. Michelle Ross returned to the game as a character animator and reworked the character design and animation to better suit this new, more realistic style. The result ended up looking better than anything I could have hoped for. It aligns perfectly with the feel I wanted for the game, giving it a rich world while maintaining a more pensive mood. After all that progress and many playtests, I decided to focus again on building the game from start to finish, now with a reworked story and level design. It is a lengthy process, but I'm very optimistic about the project. Until now, development has taken 11 years, and hopefully this video gives you an idea why. Each stage I described took months and sometimes years to complete. Remember, for almost the entire development period, I had full-time jobs as a technical animator or software engineer, so I did most of my work on The Land Forgotten over weekends. I am very proud of what me and the team have accomplished. I find The Land Forgotten to be genuinely engaging and interesting to play. I have been getting very positive feedback on the world building, characters, and puzzle mechanics. I am not sure how long it will take to complete, but I am determined to make it the best game it can be. Thank you very much for watching. I will try to make these devlogs regularly to show the progress on the game. I sometimes work on The Land Forgotten over stream, mostly on Saturdays, so feel free to drop by my Twitch channel, Daria Makes Games. This has been Devlog 0 of The Land Forgotten. See you in the next one.